I found interesting. So if you start to look at these examples individually, notice something that stands out. The next hiring ultimately has to make sense. And I know that sounds like, oh, okay, obviously. You kind of just, I feel like the best way to predict that this is going to work is wait and see. But if you want to try to guess before we see, just bet on the guy that's making the decision and how he's done in the past. And to me, I'm going to bet on Dan Campbell because he's done a pretty good job in the past. Because if you look at some of these other teams and what their decisions were, you're like, wait a minute, why would they do that? Like, for example, Philadelphia Eagles, they promoted both from within. Nick Sirianni seemingly missed on both of those. Both those guys were fired after a year. Their stats dropped in both cases. One of them actually wasn't as bad as it kind of gets noted, but both of them were gone. Gannon took another job elsewhere. Steichen took his job in Indy. Neither of those really worked, all right? So they went a different route. But you got guys like Josh McDaniels. So he was with New England. He's their offensive coordinator. When he leaves, New England goes to Matt Patricia as their offensive coordinator. And when you think about that, it's like, okay, well, what do we do with that? Because, like, all right, I guess it's an in-house promotion. It's not normal, though. And it doesn't seem like that made a lot of sense. So, of course, that failed. Mike McDaniels. Here's a positive example. Mike McDaniels now with Miami. I'm not talking about what he did in Miami. With San Francisco, they actually got better offensively when he left. The year Mike McDaniels left, they actually got better. And the weird part, well, I won't say the weird part, but it's an understandable part. Again, these things have to make sense. Kyle Shanahan's their offensive coordinator that year. When he leaves, he becomes their offensive coordinator. And I'm looking, and I'm like, wait a minute. Who is their offensive coordinator? They didn't have an offensive coordinator. It was Kyle Shanahan. They're like, Kyle Shanahan's the offensive coordinator, which is like, all right, that makes sense. It's Kyle Shanahan. It's his offense. You know, I guess they don't need an offensive coordinator, and they got better without him. You know, Mike McDaniel seems like he does a really good job with what he's doing offensively, but they got better without him. And then you go to an example like, all right, well, Kevin O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell leads the Rams. But all of us look at it as Sean McVay's offense. It did get worse when Kevin O'Connell left. He's pretty good with the Vikings. But that next season, Stafford played half the year. Now, the numbers were bad, but he only played half the year. It's like, I don't know how much I want to really grab from that. And the year before, they won the Super Bowl. DeMeco Ryans leaves. He's an awesome head coach, it seems, in Houston. However, when he leaves, they go out of house and say, let's go get Steve Wilks, who's been a defense coordinator before. You could argue they were very similar to the year before across the board. I mean, their pass defense arguably got better. They allowed a very similar points per game. Their run defense was in the similar ball, but the run defense took a little bit of a step back. Their pass defense maybe got better, and they were essentially the same in terms of points per game. So really, it wasn't much of a change with San Francisco. And I think, again, to the point that I made at the beginning, the best way to guess what's going to happen is probably look at what the core of the team is. Even after that guy left, the style of who they are doesn't really change that much. Like, you still know what you got to deal with when you play San Fran. They didn't lose DeMeco Ryans, and you're like, oh, man, what do we got to get now? Like, you can tell, all right, there might be some tweaks, but we're still playing the Niners. When Mike McDaniel left, you're still playing the San Fran offense with Kyle Shanahan and all these different weapons. And then Christian McCaffrey comes to the fold. It's like, oh, they're really good. Kevin O'Connell, while I was like, all right, the next year wasn't great, but it's been pretty darn good, it seems like, with that team. They've had to tweak some things, but it's come from the top down. But ultimately, it seems like as a whole, the biggest reason for that getting back on track was just that their offensive line got better. They invested there again. I think that the best way to look at this is you can't look at it from coach to coach and just guess, because even if you go back to 2021, like Brian Daboll left. And Brian Daboll, immediately when he left, remember the conversation? It was like, oh, Brian Daboll left. That's why Josh Allen's taking a step back. Dude, the stats were pretty much the same across the board when he left. Like, think about it. They ran the ball arguably better in terms of yards per carry. Their expected points went down. Their rushing yards per game were very similar. And passing the football, they were actually better, but they were about the same in touchdown to interception ratio. And that's when Ken Dorsey took over. And Ken Dorsey was an in-house promotion. It seems to be like there is no, this is the right way to do it statistically, go this direction. There doesn't seem to be any consistency to that. Maybe I got to go back further in years. To me, what I gather when just looking at these teams' names from Raheem Moore, I mean, Dan Quinn left Dallas, and Dallas just fell off a cliff. But as soon as I went into that, I was like, well, yeah, but Micah was hurt. Literally everybody on that team was hurt. They couldn't stop the run at all. They don't even have dudes to stop the run. So the biggest thing there is like, all right, they got really injured. They got Mike Zimmer, a pretty good defensive coach. Well, is he or is he not? Because their defense got a lot worse. I don't know if that was Mike Zimmer thing. Maybe they just didn't have the people to match with the philosophy. So I think the biggest way to gauge if it's going to work is simply like this. As long as the identity of who that team is stays relatively the same, and that doesn't change, tweaks are going to happen. Things are going to look different because every coach is different. Guys see it differently. They can react to things differently. If those are similar, it feels like that's going to give you the best shot to make it work, because I don't think any of us are looking at it like, hey, Dan Campbell's just like Kyle Shanahan. Just let him call the offense now. Like nobody's really thinking of it like that, even though he did call plays and it seemed like it worked pretty well. But when he called plays, I think maybe that was the best opportunity for us to get a sense of, okay, this is what Dan Campbell believes in. Let's not turn the ball over. Let's run the football. Like it was like, all right, this is Dan Campbell's thing. Maximize our weapons and feed those dudes. DeAndre Swift, you're getting the ball all the time. We don't have any weapons. And he's been able to kind of adjust. Like since that time we had no weapons, it's okay, we're going to turn the ball over. We just need Goff to be aggressive. You know, I mean, this guy's went from like, let's not turn the football over because we can't make up for those things, to like last year where it's like, we want to be aggressive. And I'm watching Goff play that playoff game. Like, it's not great because we're throwing a lot of picks. This is as aggressive as I've seen him. So I kind of love it too. And I thought it, it led to a lot of big plays as well. It's like we're kind of opening that up a little bit. But the philosophy, I don't think has ever moved. There's tweaks to it because you're like, all right, our personnel is better. But as long as those things are aligned, I think that philosophy has changed. We still want to run the ball. We still need to play it through the run offensively. That still has to be a thing. We still need to win the turnover battle. Every year, he's like, we got to start forcing turnovers. They come in bunches. What happened to the defense last season? The thing that I always say is I don't think we lost our identity in how we called things. I thought we lost what made us really good on defense, stopping the run at a dominant level. And I think the Lions this offseason said, let's pour it back into being really good against the run. Let's get that back. Let's be a really good run defensive team. And I think that's where it starts, is the identity and where this all trickles down. Every defensive line coordinator seemingly had that same perspective. I do this because I hear it all the time. Like, they lost both coordinators. I don't know what's going to happen. It's like, all right, just based on like percentages, will they take a step back? You can make a fair guess on that on offense. I mean, they scored 33 a game. Are they going to score 34 a game? It's unlikely, it feels like. I mean, maybe, I don't know. But it's like, all right, if they score 28, it's like, that's still really good. It's like, okay, things have to go right. Like defense got to make stops so you can get on offense, short field. There's a lot that goes into that little goofy stuff. But ultimately, as long as I think the identity of what it wants to be and how you're going to get there is very similar and everybody's on the same page, it's going to happen. And I think for the Lions, what's nice about this is, and this is the little thing I want to add about Dan, and I'm not saying this necessarily means it's going to work, but it gives me in a weird way an optimism. I want to know if y'all feel like this. So I want to leave y'all with this. Let me know your thoughts. Dan Campbell, and I don't know, like maybe this was already decided, but I think about a guy like our quarterback coach, Tanner, or I think about like a Tanner Engstrand, our pass game coordinator, and we all kind of like, he's going to get hired. Maybe he was like, I don't want to be here. I want to go with the Jets. It's like, okay. Maybe he's like, I want to do my own thing. I don't know. I mean, maybe he gets more control because Aaron Glenn's defensive guy. But the fact that like offensively, they didn't go that route, as much as I felt like this just makes sense. Kind of like the Ben Johnson one. It's like, all right, he had a similar background. Let's just go that route. But there's a lot of things we don't know about what these guys are actually doing, and he seemingly had a lot to do with the offense. So I'm not like dissing Tanner Engstrand. But the fact that it went from like, okay, we want to keep the philosophy the same, but I can identify how to keep that philosophy the same without having to just hire in-house. And not like a guy like Tanner Engstrand just stepping in. You're like, oh, of course it was Tanner Engstrand stepping in. It makes me believe, I get a little feeling that like, all right, there's something here that Dan was like, this guy, John Morton, this one actually might be the right time to make this happen. Like this is actually the better call. I get the sense that he may have looked at it like that. Like this might be the better move to identify through David Shaw and all these assistants that he brings in. Then defensively, every assistant comes from the same identity. They may have come from different coaching staffs. I mean, the offensive guys come from the same coaching trees, so that makes sense. But defensively, they come from different places. But, man, they all come with the same identity. Here's how we're going to do it on the front. Here's how we're going to play our gaps. Like, it's been the same for like 2.5 years now. It's going to continue. We're going to play gap and a half up front. That's how we want to play it. It's been able to recognize that in-house and out-of-house. So I don't think in-house or out-of-house really matters is ultimately the thing here. It's just, can you keep the identity the same or keep the philosophy of how you're going to get there the same and ultimately have tweaks within that because you have to adjust because, you're human beings. And you think about a guy like Kelvin Shepherd, and you think about Kelvin Shepherd and like, okay, we're going to take a step back. Well, I would think pass defense, right? Because Aaron Glenn not only was the secondary coach, of course, but I thought what improved so much was his ability to adapt game by game. Like, yeah, we were a man team, but game by game, he was different. I mean, we blitzed less this year because we have these pieces. Things tweaked. The identity was the same, but things tweaked. You're aggressive on third down. That was always the same. That never felt different. I never felt like with Aaron Glenn, it was like, we're not going to be aggressive on third down this year. That was always the thing with the Lions. But there were different ways to get to that path. It was like, okay, maybe we'll blitz. Maybe we're not going to here. But every game was unique with Aaron Glenn by the time we got to the last season, right? There was a uniqueness in each game plan to it. And I think seeing things like that, it could get you to the point where like, all right, Kelvin, maybe he's not there yet when he first steps in. Maybe he is. Hopefully, maybe he's a step past that. Maybe he's not there. Maybe there's like, all right, there's some bumps here. Maybe we didn't have the best plan for these guys, and that's a learning curve that's just going to happen naturally. And maybe that's where you have like, okay, hopefully John Morton has less of this, kind of where he's been. He's been an OC before, but I don't think the style of how either of these guys are going to do things are going to change. And I think with this, that matters is because the personnel has to match too. And the personnel the Lions that brought in fits, of course, but it also, it thinks like a team like Philly. Like Philly fell off. Yeah, but how much of that was the whole thing didn't make sense? It's like, all right, we lost these really good coordinators, and then we went and we hired guys from in-house, and we don't look like we have any identity. Philly didn't look like they had an identity by the end of the season. They're like, we're going to run the ball and we're going to throw deep passes. It was like, there's no creativity here at all. It's like, we're just going to like step one.
To me, why this is so important is because it takes me back to when Dan Campbell got here. When he told us he wasn't just going to hire guys that he was familiar with or friends with. Instead, he was going to hire the best football coach, right? The best coach for the team. So he has to be able to identify that this fits what we're trying to do. That way the draft picks continue to make sense. And that speaks to the Lions' alignment that they have top down. They have such strong alignment that they can then go and look for a coaching staff and build that and put that together. Dan and Brad can work on that together because everything can kind of sync together. And here's how we're trying to do it. I think in the case of like Philly, you would think, oh, in-house promotion. Okay, we're kind of doing the same thing. And even if that was kind of how it looked, it didn't necessarily maybe mean that that was the best candidate. And no shots at those guys, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the best candidate just because they're running the same thing because they were there. In our case, John Morton, they felt clearly was the best candidate for this spot. They had him here before, yes, but they felt that he was the best candidate rather than just going with a guy that was already on the staff the year before. And on the flip side, Kelvin Shepherd. But I think a lot of us from the outside believe that that was the best candidate just based on who Kelvin Shepherd has been, the way that he's worked up with the Lions, and obviously the way that he just presents himself. We don't know all those ins and outs, but just going back to when Dan Campbell got here and some of the decisions he had to make, not all of them hit Anthony Lynn, but the fact that he didn't take that job and pass it off to somebody else, say somebody else call plays. He said, I'm going to call plays because he was able to recognize like, okay, maybe this isn't the best spot to have someone else call. I'm going to call plays. I'm the best option right now. And he's able to be aware of his staff, right? We questioned some moves like, I was questioning when they got rid of Aubrey Pleasant. I didn't get it, but they did get better. And Aubrey Pleasant doesn't mean he wasn't a great coach, but it just didn't work the same for what the Lions were doing stylistically or how they wanted to approach things. And Aubrey Pleasant's still doing his thing. And he had a great resume when he got here. And not every coach, Mark D. Lone, that one didn't connect either. But ultimately, Dre Bly, that one didn't connect either. But ultimately, you believe in Dan based on what we've seen and his ability to eventually get it right.
Media constantly brings up. And then today, Frank retires and it's like, oh, goodness, the season's over. Like, these guys are in trouble. They lost both coordinators and they lost their center. They've lost everything. And you're like, wait a minute, they haven't lost everything. Okay, let's calm down. But I felt like this was the purpose. And this was actually, I was doing this before the Frank Bregnon news broke. But like the whole, you lose both coordinators, it's automatically going to be bad. Or so like, yeah, it's hard to replace good coaches. I don't think that's like a new claim. It's like the teams that have consistency are the teams you would expect to have consistency, and it starts with the guy on top. Like having a guy like Sean McVay, it starts with that, or having a guy like Kyle Shanahan, it starts with that. Not, like you have to have that dude that you trust. And I think the difference between Dan and Nick Sirianni when that first stage came around is that Dan had to take over play calling. But Dan recognized that. He didn't have to. I mean, Dan could have been like, all right, look, Andy Lynn, we don't want you calling plays. That guy's calling plays. Here you go. Give it to him. And they didn't do that. They could have done that. He could have done that. Or he could have been like, you know what, Anthony's just hanging out for the rest of the season. We don't love you here, but just do it. We're bad anyway, so who cares? Like, it wasn't like he made the change. We're like, all right, this is for the playoff push. Like, we were garbage anyway. But he was like, maybe I don't have the guy here. I'm going to hold the fort down.
I mean, let's remember, Dan Campbell wants to instill his culture and what he wants it to look like, right? He has a way that he wants the game to be played out. The dude fired their offensive coordinator when he took over as the interim head coach. He was the interim head coach for the Dolphins the year that he got his opportunity, and he fired their offensive coordinator, Bill Lazor, for not running the ball enough. So this is not new to Dan Campbell. This is who he's always been.
So he was at least seemingly able to recognize that. And it would have been one thing if he takes it over and it's like, all right, the Lions cannot get first downs anymore. No more first downs for the Lions now that Dan Campbell's made this change. They actually got better. And I think there was a lot that played into it, some with personnel too. Like, all right, welcome in Josh. That helps. Welcome in Taylor Decker. That helps. But it did like get better with him. So at very least, he definitely has a sense on what he's doing. And I'm not saying that he's a Kyle or a Sean, and he doesn't need to be that same time because he's clearly been a great coach for us. But like Brian Daboll leaving, and look, their head coach is the defensive guy. That's Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott is a defensive coach, right? Brian Daboll leaves. Giants aren't doing that well, but Brian Daboll leaves. They bring in Ken Dorsey, promote him. He takes over. Offense pretty good. Next season, he fires the dude. They go with a different offense coordinator, and it seems better. It's like, all right, we're gonna kind of change it up a little bit. That's crazy. It's like, all right, but who's at the top? Who's at the top calling the shots here that's making this make sense? And we look at the teams that don't seemingly do well with it. The Colts go high, like Eberflus. Like, all right, yeah, that makes sense why that didn't work out. They couldn't find the next guy. I mean, that's understandable that they weren't able to figure that out. You think the Patriots hired defensive coordinators. At that point, I think Belichick was just checked out. He's like, all right, this is not it. Not it, Chief. The Packers at least still have the same guy. You know, Matt LaFleur is a pretty good coach. They have the same guy at least there. San Francisco took no drop. LA Rams, same guy as the offensive coordinator since that time. Like the good teams and the guys that you would trust on the top, the guys that you would trust that head coach to take that over and make that right decision, seemingly make the right decisions. And that seems to be the best path to do it. You know, Baltimore and Mike McDonald, still really good defensively. Now, they took some steps back with personnel and things, but they're still really good. And they still have the same guy there. And then there's Dallas. And it's like, all right, we don't really know what Dallas is doing. Dallas moves off and Quinn, and their defense like, yeah, we're horrible. Yeah, we don't know what we're doing, guys. We are garbage on defense. Like, this dude is band-aiding a lot of things. They also got hurt a lot, though, too, as pointed out. But we don't really know what's going on.